there's components where the government is helpful. So like, for example, like back to the issue of property rights. So the Mi'kmaq lobster dispute in Nova Scotia has been happening since the 1700s. So on one side, you have the commercial fishermen who say that indigenous fishermen are threatening their livelihoods by trapping the crustaceans outside of the federally regulated lobster season. And then on the other side, we have the indigenous fishermen that trap to maintain a moderate, in quotes, moderate livelihood, which is outlined in the Peace and Friendly Treaty of 1752. So basically, these two groups have been warring for years over the seas, to the point where you had some of the commercial fishermen. I don't know if it was commercial fishermen, but somebody burnt the place where where the indigenous people keep all their stock of lobsters. Yeah.
Fishing supply?
Yeah. So basically, the place where they keep all of their stock from everything they've caught and all the lobsters, that was burnt to the ground. And so the disputes, of course, became a major issue in the city. But I say all that to say that, they're fighting over the season, fighting over the lobsters. But how do we apply, and how is this a case for tragedy of the commons? Where is the tragedy in this?
The tragedy is that we're missing property rights, right? If you go back to my ideal of property rights, you're missing the excludability. These groups, neither one of these groups has the right to exclude the other group, and they're both concerned about destroying the fishery because we're going to take too many lobsters and too many fish, and that is what the tragedy of the common is. It is the lack of property rights when we have a scarce resource, and so everybody competes against each other to try to take that last fish or that last lobster, and there's no incentive for nobody to not take that last lobster, right? Because if I don't take it, somebody else is going to. I have no ability to exclude them. So the resolution comes in creating better property rights, and that is one of the areas that government is really important to help us. And I would say it is the key role for government is to help us define and defend and enforce our property rights. And sometimes that's really difficult to do. If we're looking at fisheries where fish swim, it's even more difficult than with lobster. I think the lobster problem comes from sort of these old traditional norms and from existing property rights or existing what people think are rights, privileges to go catch those lobsters, and that competing demand for those resources, right? We have these different groups that are competing for this scarce resource. And the government solution seems to be, we're going to pick a winner and then the other person is a loser, or the other group is a loser, rather than actually trying to better define those property rights. And that way we can actually allow for some cooperation to take place. And if we look at many of our fisheries, our ocean fisheries, our commercial fisheries, we have tragedy of the commons that have just caused major collapse of our fisheries over time. And now we have a number of different countries that are using what we call individual tradable quotas or catch shares sometimes. And what that is government actually comes in and says, okay, there's a certain amount of this fish or these lobsters that we can catch, and that's going to be what we call our total allowable catch. And we can catch so many fish, but we want to make sure that we have some measure of what the total population is in the ocean, and we want to know how many we have to leave in the ocean so that it's sustainable. So once we have that total number of fish in the ocean, and we know how many we have to leave there, then we can actually calculate out that total allowable catch. And then we divide that, what we call a TAC, up amongst the different fishers in that fishery. And it's typically done on a historical catch basis and on a percentage basis. So if I historically caught 10% of those lobster, then I would now have the right to catch 10% of that total allowable catch. Suddenly my incentives have changed. We can exclude other people. Only those folks that have one of these catch shares or quota can actually go out and fish. And we can only catch a certain amount. But if that population grows, which presumably it will if we've measured the sustainable population well enough, then my 10% is still 10%, but the weight or the number of fish I can catch there will increase as that that TAC increases. And so suddenly I have the motivation to only catch a certain amount and to help monitor other people to make sure that they're not overfishing out there. And then we also have the tradable component. So if I am not the lowest cost fisher, then I can actually sell that to somebody else that can be more efficient to go out and catch those fish or those lobsters. So this whole problem that we see is a property rights based problem.
Now, would you say that the solution you described is trying to mimic property rights? So, like, because I think about, well, essentially we still have an unowned property, and rather than, because arguably this wouldn't or can't happen in the way that governments operate, which is, a private enterprise or a private individual coming and buying the land or the let's say the ocean space. Because I think about it, well, if it was a single owner, they would potentially just charge people a fee to come and fish, and they would have an incentive to maintain the population of fish so that next year they can get income again the following year.
Yep.
And so what you're describing is a way for commonly owned property to try to mimic the free market. Would you say that's a proper classification?
Yep. Actually, what the tradable quotas are is a cap and trade program. Basically, we have this resource that is hard to keep contained. I mean, lobsters might be easier because they don't move quite as much as fish do. But let's just say we have this resource that's really hard to contain. It moves around. How do we put a property right on that? And so government has basically come in and said, okay, well, we're going to put some cap on the max amount that people can catch, and we're going to give each person an actual property right in that amount of fish, and allow for that trade to take place. So the cap is that government's come in and said, this is the max amount that you can catch, and here's how we're going to allocate that amount of catch to the different individuals. Now, the market part of that is you're allowed to actually go out and trade that different quota so that we can have a more efficient marketplace and be more efficiently producing our fish or lobsters.
To hear the rest of the discussion, click the YouTube link. For the full episode, go to sixthsensereport.com. And remember, 6 cents makes change.